Okay, I'm going to do one for you the long way that we learned yesterday, and then I'm going to do one for you that looks like how the level I want you to get to, like sort of almost like being able to do it in your head pretty much. So the long way one that I'm going to do for you will be this problem right here, set 1, number D, or letter D, I guess not a number. 9x cubed plus 30x. So the goal is to factor it. Remember yesterday we talked about finding the GCF, putting it on the outside, and then putting the leftover factors on the inside of the parentheses. And so if I was going to do this long, I would do this. 9x cubed is 3 times 3 and 3x's. Okay, that's the first term. And 30x, 30 is 3 times 10, and 10 is 2 times 5, and there's 1x. And what do they have in common? A 3 and an x. And so I would write down their GCF, which is everything that they have in common. So it would be 3x. Let me get this out of the way. 3x, and then I would open up some parentheses, and I would put the leftover factors for each term. That first term, 9x cubed, what's left over there? A 3 and 2 x's. So I would write 3x squared. And then I would write plus, because that comes next in the original problem. And then what was left over from the 30x? Well, I had 2 times 5, which is 10. And how could I double check my answer here? Distributive, right? Distributive. So it's really like factoring is reverse distributive property. We're dividing out stuff instead of multiplying through stuff. And then what I do is look at these columns. On that left-hand column, I find the 3x. And in the right-hand column, I find the 3x squared plus 10. That's a 2 and a t. And so at the very bottom of your worksheet where you're filling in the answer to the riddle, you find number 2, and you put a t in the box. And then I'm going to do one more for you, a longer one, and I want to show you how you might do it, start doing it in your head. So you don't necessarily, you want to work towards not having to draw it out every time. Is it okay to draw it out if you have to? Yes, absolutely. But if you can start going faster, that's ideal. So for example, if I was trying to, I'm going to do this one right here, this C in set 4. I would look at the coefficients first, 15, 35, and 40, and I would just think for a minute, what's the biggest number that goes into all 3 of those? The answer is 5. All right. So I write down 5. And then I would look at the x's, and I would say, what's the most number of x's that all 3 have in common? Well, this one has 3, but this one, the most it has is 2. Well, this one, the most it has is 1. So what's the most that they all have together? How many? Just 1, right? So I write 1x here. And then what's the most number of y's that they all have? Yeah, this one has 2 and this one has 2, but the first term does not. So just 1 y that they all have in common. So I write that y down. Now this is what they all have that's the same, of 1 5, 1 x, and 1 y. And then in parentheses I go and trying to think about, okay, so now what do they have left over? So if I'm looking at this first term, 15x cubed y, I know that I took the 15, I divided 5 out. That leaves me 3 left. And then there were 3 x's and I divided 1 out. So how many x's do I have left in that first term? If I took 1 out, now I have how many? 2 squared. And then I took the y out completely, so there's no y's left in that first term. And then minus comes next. And then I have 35x squared y squared. So 35, I divided 5 out with the GCF. That leaves me 7. That was x squared. I divided out 1x. So how many x's are left? 1. And then y squared, I took out 1y, so I'm left with 1y. And then for that third term, it's plus 40, which I divided out of 5, so that leaves me 8. There was 1x. I divided out an x, so I'm left with no x's, so I'm not going to write anything there. And then I had 3 y's, and I divided out 1 y, so I'm left with 2 y's. Okay, so that's an example of how you can do it in your head. Do you have to do it in your head? No, you could draw it out long, but you still do want to practice going faster, as fast as you can, just to save time. So when we get into other problems in the unit, it's not taking you too long. And so then I find 5xy over here, and 3x squared minus 7xy plus 8y squared, which is this last one. And look carefully, because look, this s and this w look pretty much the same, except for that last term. And so then that's 17w, so wherever 17 is, I put a w. Right? And so that worksheet is due today before you leave. And I want to see all your work. So if you think it's too cramped on the worksheet, show your work on a separate paper and staple it and turn it in. You may have your music while you work, okay?